Choking in a haze of cigarette smoke, friend had a sleepover for his birthday. His mom was a huge smoker. Chain smoker doesn't even go far enough. She was lighting the next one before the current one was finished. My dad had to come pick me and two of my friends up. One woke me up crying because he had horrible asthma and was suffocating. The other just wanted to get out. My eyes burned. It was rough. So I snuck to their phone, called home, at 3 a.m., and my dad came and picked us up. Gave my friend some clothes to wear so he could wash everything while we crashed. The way he recalls it, when we got into the car, my dad started gagging. Felt bad for the friend having the sleepover. We just told him the following week at school that we had to be up for something in the morning. Lucky sleepover. About 10 years ago, when I was 15, my Auntie Jo, best friend Lynn and I decided on a whim to have a sleepover. We had gathered in my Nan/Jo's house and were watching films, eating pizza and snacks, and it got to around 11 p.m. so we decided to stay over instead of going home. We went to bed around midnight and decided to all stay in Jo's double bed, top and tail. We didn't go to sleep straight away, of course. We were gossiping and messing around, as teenage girls do. It got to around 1 a.m. and we decided to try to sleep, so we turned out the lights and got into bed. We still didn't sleep right away. We were making jokes and laughing in the dark while fighting over the quilt. Jo's room is on the first floor, so upstairs, which I think is second floor to the US folk, and it's laid out in this way. Walk in the door, the bed and window are straight ahead of you with the top end of the bed against the wall with the window on it. I was sleeping that end, so my head was at the wall end, while Jo and Lynn slept the other way around with a view of the window. I was slowly beginning to drift off to sleep, but kept hearing this noise that sounded a bit like something scraping the wall outside. I tried to ignore it, but it kept me awake, so I lay in the dark with my eyes open and waited for exhaustion to take over. All of a sudden, Jo screamed, jumped out of the bed and said, "Get away from the window." Lynn then screamed. And I looked at the window to see what was happening and saw the silhouette of a person with their arms raised. We ran downstairs screaming for my Nan, who rushed out from the living room to see what all the noise was. Jo was crying at this point while Lynn and I were just in shock, and we each tried to explain what had just happened. Once we finally got it out, my Nan called the police and went upstairs with a bat to see if the person was still there. They weren't. The police turned up and took our statements, checked the area and came up with nothing, but gave us another number to call should anything suspicious happen or the guy return. We decided to sleep downstairs instead of going back up to Jo's room. We were panicked and frightened, but Jo was still in a state. Lynn and I tried to calm her down and comfort her by saying he was gone and we could call the police if he came back, but Jo looked us both in the eyes and told us something that makes my skin crawl when I think about it now. See, Jo lives in this big Victorian-style house in a quiet area, and while there is a roof right beneath her window, she always locks the window before sleeping and the lock is easily visible. This person, this guy, climbed up the roof and tried to open Jo's window. The guy had his arms raised though, which confused me until Jo told me that her window can open both ways, and she often opened it from the top instead of the bottom. The guy had clearly been watching the house for at least a day and had decided to strike that night, but luckily we had been having the sleepover and saw him. Had Jo been alone that night, she would have been lying on her bed normally and wouldn't have seen the silhouette. So, to the guy who was watching my aunt and tried to break in to rob her or something worse, let's never meet. Singing hymns before getting uncomfortably close, I spent the night at a kid's house that lived a couple streets over in the same neighborhood who I had only known through other friends I had on his street. We had to read the Bible and sing hymns and then go to bed at 7 p.m., which during the summer is essentially broad daylight. But before we went to bed, the kid's mom made him sit on the toilet to poop and pee, and then the guy's mom still wiped his butt for him. We were roughly 11 to 12, and did it with the door wide open. If all this wasn't uncomfortable enough, his mom laid on the bed with him and brushed his hair and sang to him so he could fall asleep. I got up as soon as the whole house was asleep and went out via their garage, which set off their house alarm, and booked it home. Sleepover gone wrong. Before I say anything else, let me tell you that while not all that creepy in itself, This was one of the most uncomfortable nights of my entire life spent in the bed of some guy I barely knew. Let me explain how this happened. I was actually 14 at the time, but I had a friend I'd known since I was around 11. She was 4 years older than me herself, so she would have been 18. Despite the age difference, we'd always been close, but she'd recently moved out of the city only to move back again and begin living with her aunt. Being back in town and all and not having seen me for a while, she invites me over to spend the night and I agree. The walk there in itself was creepy enough, as she lived a fair ways away still, even being within the same city. A homeless man chatted me up at the first streetlight, and people catcalled me from their porches and hollered other kinds of obscenities. I basically walked the entire way there terrified as hell before I even saw her, maybe like 10 minutes away from her house. I believe we were walking down the street when she stopped at a friend's house to say hello, but he wasn't just a friend, he was some guy that was actually interested in her at the time. Anyway, we end up staying a while and she tells me we'll head back to her house soon. Fine, okay. Anyway, the dude starts commenting on how little and cute I am, specifically my hands. And at this point I feel a little creeped out but write it off anyway. Eventually it gets pretty late, and the dude suggests we could spend the night at his house. Obviously there is no way in hell that I want to do this, but she convinces me anyway. Even convinced as I was searching for any possible opportunity to get out of there. Could I call my grandpa to come pick me up? No, it was too late and I didn't want to bother him, especially to come pick me up from some random dude's house late at night. And I sure as hell wasn't walking all the way back to my house, late at night, in the dark, especially not after what I'd experienced on the walk there at nearly 7 p.m. Eventually, we all go sit on the waterbed and watch a movie. I'm trying not to fall asleep at first, basically just because I'm uncomfortable and just don't want to, but eventually I get really tired and fall asleep anyway. Later, I wake up for some unknown reason to find both of them still awake. My friend tells me it's okay and that I should go back to sleep. I don't argue. As soon as we wake up the next morning I have her walk me home, not wanting to stay any longer than I already have, and we go. Later my sister tells me that my friend, who was actually friends with us both, closer to my sister's age though, had sex with that guy that same night, while I was sleeping on the bed next to them. Multiple times. Needless to say, I was pretty disgusted. I saw the guy a few times after that around town/school grounds, and he'd just smirk at me. Definitely the worst sleepover of my life. Seeing sights that can't be unseen, the bedroom door was open and I slept facing it. Except I wasn't asleep and had a full view of my friend's stepdad walking past. He was completely naked and when he saw me, he just stood there facing me and asked, "Aren't you asleep?" As if that was still in my plans. I told my friend about it the next morning and she made me write a note saying, "I like your willy." He put it up on the fridge. There's still 2 doors down the street, but I haven't spoken to them in more than 10 years now. Sleepover at Uncle's house. Hey guys, I am not sure if this story belongs on this sub. If it does not, please let me know and I can move it to the correct one. This story actually happened to my dad well back in the 70s in his home country of Fiji, so there is no way I can get any type of newspaper article or anything like that, but I am assure you this is real. I have verified this story with my mom and my uncles and it is all legit. So here we go. My dad lived in a farming area and each house/farm was a few miles apart from each other. When my dad was about 14 years old, he was invited to a sleepover at his uncle's house. My dad liked this uncle so he went over for the night. His uncle had a wife and 3 kids. Ages were 3 and 4 and a baby that was like 6 months old. They had a great time eating, chatting, playing with the kids, and then it was bedtime. My dad goes to sleep and wakes up to this huge noise. Then he hears screaming and something that sounded like gunshot. He runs to his uncle's room and sees his uncle shooting the wife and kids. My dad freaks out and runs away. He runs across the house and tries to go through one door, but he can't open it because it was jammed for some reason. Old farmhouse that needed lots of work. So his only option was to run back to the other side and use the other door, which would mean he would need to cross his uncle's room again. He had no choice and slowly walks back and couldn't help but peek in the room. He sees his uncle standing there with a gun, and as my dad is staring at him, his uncle turns around and looks at him and says, "You're lucky I let you live," and puts the gun to his head. As my dad freaks out and starts running, he hears one more gunshot. My dad runs out of the house and keeps running down the dirt road all the way back to his own house. Lucky his dad was still up with some friends drinking and playing cards. My dad basically collapses as he makes it to his front porch and tells everyone what happened. They call the police and the police go to investigate and find everyone dead. A little while later, my dad finds out that his uncle had quite a few mental issues and was supposed to be taking medication for it, which he wasn't. That is the reason he went crazy that night. As you can imagine, my dad was traumatized for a long time after and had nightmares of his uncle for a long time, so it really is a let's not meet as his uncle is no longer alive. Once again, I assure you this story is true, as I can see it in my dad's eyes whenever he tells me this story, and I wish I could have some sort of news article, but this was in the 70s and it was in Fiji, so there is no way I can find anything. Played with matches. For years afterward, thought I'd burned my aunt and uncle's house down. I was staying with them. My cousin and I were lighting matches in the kitchen and throwing them in the sink to put them out. The head of one flew off and landed in the shelving unit by the sink, still smoking, but when we looked for it, we couldn't find it. It was the 80s, so all those "kids, don't play with matches" ads were everywhere. Hours later, we were awakened by my aunt telling us to get out of the house because it was on fire. Watched their house burn to the ground and was terrified to tell them what we'd been doing earlier. I just knew we'd done it. Carried that guilt for years, she said. When I was around 15-ish, which was many years later, I finally told my aunt. She started laughing, and after realizing I'd been thinking this the whole time, hugged me and explained it had been wiring in the back bedroom. I was an adult before I finally understood, after learning about how fire marshals investigate fires, that it wasn't just an assumption they'd made and could let go of that guilt. So I guess, technically, the most screwed up thing I did on a sleepover was traumatize myself for years. That night I slept at a friend's house. When I was in high school, I was like 16. I had a friend, Lisa, and a second friend, Zoe. Lisa had like a lot of money, and her huge house was located right next to our high school. So every time we had a break or anything, the three of us would go there, and we also would have a lot of sleepovers at her house. It was this huge rich people house, so it was awesome to stay there. So one day, we decided to stay the night there. The three of us plus Lisa's little sister, Anna. Their mother was gone for the night. We decided to put on some PJs and watch scary movies for hours. Anna went to bed before us three, and we just stayed in the living room watching TV. At one point, the alarm goes on. It happens sometimes, so Lisa just go turn it off, and that was it. But then, like 10 minutes later, the alarm goes on again, and it scared us, because it's not supposed to. Technically, the alarm was made to ring only when humans come by, because the house was located in the middle of the forest, so we all knew that sometimes animals would come by the house. Happened before, so when the alarm was installed, it was calibrated for humans only, and it was the second time it rang. We started to get a little bit scared, so we went upstairs, opened the windows to look at the garden all around the house, and nothing. We even went on the balcony in the middle of the night. Nothing. I was alone on the balcony at some point, and the alarm went on again and the automatic lights around the swimming pool turned on. That meant something was around the pool, and I was just above it. I got so scared I got on my knees and stayed there until my friend deactivated the alarm and the lights, and I ran inside the house. At this point, we were really, really scared, and started thinking about what it could be. If it has to be any human, all our lights were on, so they knew where we were. We turned all the lights off, and all four of us went hiding downstairs in the kitchen, without our phones. I don't even know why not even one of us thought about taking at least one phone. So we were there, lights off, scared in a huge house, with windows everywhere we could look. The alarm went berserk again. Anna screamed. Lisa took her with her, reassuring her while walking to shut the alarm off, like turn it off once and for all. So I was in the kitchen, with Zoe only, and we were just looking all around us. The alarm was upstairs, so the two girls were far from us. At some point we heard footsteps right beside us, like right on the other side of the wall, in the garden. It was fast, not scared, just fast, like that person knew where they were going. So we just freezed, waiting in the dark, and jumped when something, well someone, it was obvious, walked by the door/window right in front of us. We think it was a he, had a light, but it was another light that allowed us to see his silhouette. So they were at least two, running around the house for about at least 20/30 minutes. Detail, this door was, like I said, a windowed door, but there was Venetian blinds on it. They were not closed, of course. We were still not moving, and the girls upstairs were so scared that they stayed there, at least it's what they told us. Suddenly, one voice, then a second one. I was unable to understand anything, but I heard it, and Zoe and I were blinded by a sudden light right at our faces. We were literally not able to move, scream, talk, not anything we could have done was possible. We were just frozen in fear. The light stayed there, someone was seeing us trot the blinds, someone was watching us being scared and was just staying there. Suddenly we heard a hard sound on the front door, which was closed. Zoe didn't move at all, but I don't know what took me. It just woke me up and I crawled to the door in front of me, back door, closed the blinds and just hold the door in place in case the guy on the other side tried to force it. Honestly, I'm small and thin, my little body was useless there, but I did it anyway. The one at the front door was still trying to enter, Zoe still not moving, the two girls upstairs doing I don't know what, and the one just a glass window away from me start hitting it. Trying to force it. It was closed, but I just grabbed the handle and hang in there for a while. He was just hitting ANS trying to open the door. All this lasted hours in my head, but I believe it was only few seconds. At one point, the hits at the front door stopped. Few seconds later, the other one in front of me stopped as well. Then the lights just moved fast everywhere. The alarm did nothing, so it was disabled as wanted, and there was nothing. Zoe and I just slept in the kitchen, and the two sisters upstairs. Nothing happened at all. It was over. The next day, Lisa and Anna's mom came back home. We told her everything, got a bit yelled at because we didn't call the cops. I took it wrong at that time, but I understand now why she got upset. She called the cops, who went to see the house and just discovered footsteps all around the house, some muddy footprints/mark on the front door. They said they must have kicked the door, and that was it. They told us it must have been some guys who were just doing some recognition, when they just walk around the houses to see how to rob it. It was common in this area. There was a lot of really big and beautiful houses filled with expensive things. The only thing I will never be able to explain is why they started being so aggressive. Originally, they were just walking around the house, but I think that if they were trying to see something, or just look things up, they would have left when they realized we were inside. Or at least left when that guy saw us in the kitchen. Well, they didn't. The moment they saw us in the kitchen, they didn't see the two sisters. They start being aggressive and trying to force the doors to enter the house where we were. I don't know if they really wanted to rob the house. I will never, and honestly, I don't want to know. I didn't spend any more nights at this house. I got so scared they will come back again I couldn't sleep there. Lisa got a bit mad, like she didn't understand, but from what she told Zoe and I, she didn't see them. She just stayed upstairs with her sister. I understand it, but I wasn't able to stand the fact that she couldn't understand how scared I was as well. Feeling sick from feces and pizza, I was invited to birthday sleepover party for a kid in my class when I was in 3rd grade. I barely knew the kid, but my mom said it would be nice if I went because he didn't have many friends. I was about to find out why. When I arrived to the house, the enclosed front porch was full of feces. To be honest, I'm not sure it was dog or human, although there were about 5 or 6 dogs wandering around. The smell immediately made me sick, and I asked the kid's mother if she could call my mom to come pick me up because I felt sick. She refused and said, "I'm not going to do that, you just got here." That would be ridiculous. The next thing I know, me and the other kids, the birthday boy, another friend, and birthday boy's brother, are sitting on the floor of the kitchen eating pizza. We were required to finish 3 large pizzas because the mom spent all day making them. It was immediately followed by cake and ice cream. Afterwards, I again asked the kid's mom if she would call my mom to pick me up. She refused. We were then told to go outside to sled while she watched movies, and we were not allowed to come back in until about 10 p.m. When we finally came back inside, my stomach was quite upset about being force-fed pizza and sweets, followed by being repeatedly sent down a large hill in the dark. When I proceeded to throw up in the house's only toilet, I was yelled at for messing up the mother's night and throwing up in her toilet. She then called my mother to come pick me up. At midnight. Scary sleepover story. I've always been good friends with one of my cousins, Cole, who's the same age I am. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well together, and were often found together, both in school, as we'd always wound up in the same class together throughout elementary school, and outside of it. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday afternoon around the later part of May, and we were psyched at the start of the weekend. We'd wound up at his house, since he didn't live too far from me, and at one point my mom called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was being kept at the hospital overnight for observation, and both my parents and Cole's were planning on staying with him and Grandma at the hospital, since my mom and her sister were the two of their sibling who lived close by. I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother Hunter being in charge while our parents were out. This was fine by us. I got along well enough with Hunter, and he was never the bossy older brother/cousin that some of my other friends said they had to put up with. We ordered out for pizza, and enjoyed goofing off as boys that age tend to do. At around 9 or so, there was a knock at the front door, and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious as to who it could be at that time of the night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said that they were with the city and that they were investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and when Cole said they were unavailable at that moment, which we were told to say to strangers if our parents weren't home, the guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house and if they could come inside to check. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine and perhaps they should move on to check on other homes in the neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that and went back to goofing off. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I'd sleep in there with them, rather than me hitting the sack on the couch or something like that, so that we could talk while we fell asleep, and Hunter grabbed a sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got into their bedroom, they stripped down to their briefs, and I remembered Cole had mentioned to me once a while back that they had started sleeping in just their underwear. Since I hadn't originally planned on staying the night, I hadn't brought anything with me from home as far as overnight stuff, but since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I stripped down to my briefs as well, though I felt a bit embarrassed. Even though we were all guys there and I knew they wouldn't say anything or be judgmental, they climbed into their beds and I quickly crawled into the sleeping bag, and after talking for a while about random stuff we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning I got up because I had to pee, and so I quietly got out of the sleeping bag and went and did my business in the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom I heard something in the family room, which was on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms and particular bathroom I was using. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, thinking it must be either Cole or Hunter, until I got back into the bedroom and realized that both of them were still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room we saw the two guys from the night before in there, and it was rather clear they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us as he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door, somehow managed to get it unlocked and open, and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him about the two guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple of minutes several other cops were there, and they proceeded to enter the house, and after some searching they caught the two guys. The cops figured out that the two guys must have entered from a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch, and had probably targeted that house because, while it wasn't empty, they'd probably realized that there were no adults there and figured that if we discovered them, we could be more easily dealt with than adults, to add insult to injury. While we were waiting outside while the cops searched the house, both to get the two guys and make sure that there was no one else with them, Some of the neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about, and this included some kids who went to the same school as Cole and me, including a few who were in our 6th grade class with us. It was during that time that the 3 of us realized that we'd never had the chance to get dressed, so, just like in the stereotypical nightmare, we had to stand outside in full view of everyone in just our briefs for what seemed like forever before being allowed back inside. When we went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with more than a bit of snickering, stares, and ribbing for the next few weeks until school ended for the summer.